This is the What Do You Know show hosted by Rio and my co-host Griff.
Hey.
The coronavirus couldn't keep us down, bro.
It never would.
Never would. But we have been out the game for a minute, so we're really excited to get back to uploading. Really quick, just want to mention the merch on the table is You Know and Co Apparel. All of the things from our last drop are very limited in stock availability, but in most cases they're still online, so go and check it out. We're going to be running some deals here post-coronavirus leading up into our next drop, which we're working very hard on.
Man, I can't wait to hear that stuff.
Yeah, I think I sent you some of the designs, but anyway, we wanted to have a quick little two-parter to get back to the YouTube videos. We're going to start with, what do you know about selflessness? And then the second part will be selfishness. And we'll kind of compare and contrast the positive attributes for both. Would you like to start, or what you want me to start?
No. Start us off.
So I think people have, as I do with a lot of things, I think we're not using language very accurately, and we always ascribe selflessness as a positive, like just an altruistic thing, and then selfishness as a negative. They always assign a negative connotation to it. But I think that everything in life should be balanced and within moderation. For instance, I believe that to live your life completely selflessly is against human nature. And it's against human nature for a lot of ways. My primary question about selflessness is always, when should you put yourself first? And I think that in most situations, that should be your baseline thought about it. Like, should I put myself first in this instance, or is it better for the people that I do love and care about that I sacrifice? And I think that's the main distinction between those two terms. It's just about, what are you willing to sacrifice and when is it appropriate to sacrifice? And like I said, I have a lot of family members that truly act selflessly, but it ends up in the long term being very irresponsible, especially if you for instance, I heard a very interesting quote one time and I didn't really know what it meant. It was from Steve Harvey, of all people. But he's got a good treasure trove of wisdom in him too. And comedians, I feel, really poke at society's strings and kind of take out the... Oh, excuse me. Can't be cussing and stuff. No, but his quote, we'll beep it, but the quote was, the best thing you can do for a poor person is not be one of them. And I thought that was kind of like mean. I was like, that's kind of arrogant of you, Mr. Steve Harvey, and he's looking all fresh. But I kind of started to really meditate on what he meant. And this is also coupled by another quote that I had heard. I can't remember the source of it right now, but no poor person gave us a job. And I think that's also very interesting when you get into the benefits of capitalism versus the perceived benefits of socialism and communism, which we were going to do all that stuff later. But to get back to selflessness, especially if, let's say, you aren't poor and you can help people, you should be selfless in doing so. But at the same time, you have to weigh, like, am I giving somebody too much? Do they appreciate what I'm doing for them, or are they ultimately going to start taking advantage of me? And the last point I wanted to make, and then we'll see what you're kind of ruminating on, is that I feel like, because I've seen a lot of my family members go down the route of just being selfless and wanting to do for others and just, oh, lovey-dovey, oh, everything is great, but when it gets down to it, they're going to expect selflessness out of you too, or the people around them. And they may not, the people around them that they gave their whole life for, they're not going to be able to reciprocate it in the same way. And it really often leads to resentment in the future, because they're like, oh, I've done so much for you. I've grinded, and this is how you repay me, like expecting this same type of selflessness. Yeah. So I just think that we should kind of think about selflessness. Like, it's not always a great thing. It has its negative, it has your own downplay in mind too at the same time.
So I guess I agree with the point that you made, that selflessness goes against human nature. Yeah. I think as humans, we're living beings with like the whole like genetic purpose is to continue living. And so to be selfless, I mean, it goes against the idea of survival on a basic level. Yeah. And so when I think about what it takes to be selfless, I think about like discussions we've had about like having an ego and being in tune with your ego, and to be selfless is really to forsake your ego, to forsake your primal center self. And so in order to be selfless, you have to be someone who either doesn't have an ego or someone who can subvert their ego and completely ignore it. And that is, that'd be, for me, that'd be pretty weird. When I think about the reason I do things and the value that I get out of doing them, it's because it's good for me or good for things that I think are good, right? It's very, very centric around me. And so it's not selfless at all. Even thinking about charity, like doing something good for someone else, doing something to put a smile on someone else's face. When I think about the altruistic reasons that people actually do it, it's usually, either a tax write-off or it's because they feel good about themselves helping someone else. It's
That's
really
right.
not selfless at all. It's a pretty selfish reason. Like you get some satisfaction out of helping somebody out, as opposed to somebody selfless. They wouldn't really feel anything. They would just do something because someone else needed it, period. And so when I think of like selflessness in and of itself, it is a really good thing for whoever's receiving it.
That's right.
That's it.
That's the point. That's it.
That's it. But when you think about, the butterfly effects and all of that, like someone else might hurt from what's being given away, right? Because they might want that. They might need that as well. But from a single receiving end, selflessness is great.
That's right.
It's great. And it's a shame that humans aren't selfless, but at the same time, it's like we couldn't be humans if we were truly all selfless. We might be better for it, but we wouldn't be what we are.
And I think you just totally destroyed my idea of splitting into two parts, because you brought in the positive point of selfishness, and something that was like a really underappreciated point that I think you just brought up. That was something I was going to say too. It's like when we do things for others, it's usually in the vein of that I want to do it for somebody else. Yeah. But selflessness always is, hey bro, can you help me out? It's like you just said, it's when the recipient gets it and you have to sacrifice this. But when you're doing something for someone else, not because that they're asking you to do, but you want to go out of your way to show. Like for instance, and this is a small example, but I have like a more elderly neighbor, and I just, as a good person in and of myself, I was just like, hey, I'll mow your lawn. I know it's just going to take a little bit of stress off of you. Yeah. And she was like, oh, great. Well, I'll buy us a new lawnmower and you can keep it in your garage. So it was it's a small example, but it was a fantastic trade-off of her providing something for me, and her idea was selfish because then she could have me mow her lawn. I got a free lawnmower out of it, and I get to be a good person and mow my neighbor's lawn. Yeah. So and so I guess we'll just transition into selfishness a bit. I think that people ascribe to it a negative connotation of the top 1%. Why can't we just redistribute their wealth? That would be better for society. And that also leads off of the point I was talking about earlier, is that we kind of need selfish people because they're always going to be leaders, and we kind of need a selfish leader, because because I boil it down like this: if you're the head of your family and and we kind of talked about this yesterday, if you're operating for the sake of yourself, it's gonna trickle down to your family. And and I told you the small example of if your mother was asking for a raise at work or wouldn't take her boss's crap, she's acting selfishly for the sake of her family. I think that's and we always just look at things so black and white, oh, you're a selfish person, you're arrogant, you know? And kind of how you were discussing about ego earlier, it's hard to separate oneself from one's ego, because that's the innermost familiarity with our own identity that we have. That's how we kind of understand the phrase ego. And when you start to be so selfless that you don't even know who you are anymore, and you're working for other people, and we talked about happiness too. Happiness is always built on if you build it on other people, then if they want to take it away, then you're going to be destroyed. And Facts. Like I just said, some of my family members, I kind of see that in them, and I'm trying to encourage them and my friends. Some of my friends, I'm like, hey, listen, you got to start thinking about you, because especially because we're young, you know, and we can still build up, let's just say, an empire of wealth or, you know, success.
Yeah.
Don't squander it on other people just because you think that's a good thing to do.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
I think there is a balance to be had, though, like all things.
That's right. Yeah.
You know, when you think of selflessness, it's, you know, giving for the sake of giving. But when you think of selfishness, I don't think that you're inherently good because you're selfish, like all things. Yep. And I don't think that just because you are the head of a household that your selfish intentions necessarily are good for your family. Mm-hmm. I think just like everyone has their own ego, you know, like selfish can be good or bad. Yeah, for sure. For it can have, you know, positive or negative outcomes for anybody involved. But I think what's important is that if you are selfish, you know, that you attribute it to those values that are important to you. And that, I mean, if you can, values that are good for other people, right? Because you could be selfish and just greedy, and everything that you get, even if eventually it's going to go to your family, like you had to die for them to even get a piece of it. Like you could be an Ebenezer and never give anything to anybody until your dying breath. And, you know, if you're that 1% and you got all that wealth for yourself until you die, then who benefited from the time that you lived and had all of that stuff for yourself? But also, like, on the receiving end, like being selfish and being needy, I think that there's a limit to how much you should receive from others, just because, you know, like you mentioned, like if you're always getting from others, then, you know, one, you never see the value of getting something for yourself. And two, you know, you just, you see it as a handout. It's just something that can be used and gotten back. And so there's no real
reciprocity.
Kind of, there's no real like mechanism for not being poor, like the idea of being poor, like it never disappears, because you're always just getting and consuming something that, you know, comes out of thin air. Like what is this money that I'm getting? What does it mean?
Or like foregoing, like you said, building your personal character, or I could just go get a government check. Yeah. Like, yeah, if you want to be tied to the government, like that's just an example. If you want to be tied to that, then you'll never actualize who you really could truly be, and you could affect way more in people in your community and or in your family, or even, who knows, even across the state of the country. Yeah. If you kind of actualize. And what you had said, what was key was you had to find that balance. And I led off this discussion by my idea of that balance is when to sacrifice. And so don't always think that sacrificing for the people that you really love is going to help them ultimately. Yeah. Sometimes if you grind, it will, especially if you really do care about them, then it'll work out. It'll just don't have the doubt. And that's kind of what I'm trying to say here with this discussion that we're having. It's like, don't ascribe it either to be good or bad, because we can go down a list of how selfishness is a bad thing too. There's that whole, well, it started from the Greek, but then it went to the Roman, like theology. I can't remember. It was Midas, King Midas, where he had the gift of the golden touch. And he was like, oh, this is great. I'm touching apples and I'm touching tables. Everything is turning to gold. But then he realized he couldn't even eat. Yeah. And then I started freaking out and touched his daughter, and his daughter turned to gold. And so he had to renounce his arrogant view of the world for things to be made back right. But he ended up dying anyway, because he turned himself to gold. Yeah. So that's like an interesting part about selfishness, that I'm like, yeah, if you're just consumed by your own greed, then of course that vein of selfishness, that goes without saying, because I think that's how people generally interpret selfishness. Okay. I was just, as we do on this show, I was trying to point out something that people may not think about when they think about selfishness and selflessness too. Because then you could also go down the list of how great selflessness can be.
Like I said, there's got to be a balance that's struck. And for me, I'd say the balance is like between selflessness and selfishness is, you know, I'm not going to ask someone else to sacrifice something that I wouldn't sacrifice myself. Right. So that's as selfish as I can be, is like, I would never be more selfish than I would ask somebody to be. So like if I needed $100, like I wouldn't ask for it unless I could turn around and give it to someone else when they needed it. Yeah. And I would never, I hate taking things from other people unless I can give them something in return. So I don't know. I think I said the same thing twice, but like for me, the balance is like, it's an actual balance. Like I keep it level, and if something goes off the scale, then eventually something's got to go back on. It's vice versa. So I try to keep it super level there. But like I'd say generally, I'm way more selfish than I am selfless.
Yeah, me too.
Just because I feel like I got a deficit of things that I need right now, not for my sake, but for people I care about.
That's right. And I was, while you were just saying about you asking for $100 is different from your personal example. I won't name names because we like to keep things vague around here, but you were talking about donating some money to one of our friends. And that, and it was way more than $100.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking while you were saying that, like, he wouldn't ask for $100, but he would give more. And it was because you wanted to do it,
and there was a return on investment with that. So
well,
it was
then
like,
maybe not
that was a negotiation more so than altruicity. So, but yeah, it was nice.
I think I think we should just wrap it up there. I think we've given people something to think about, and always. Well, can we wrap it up there? You got anything else?
Yeah, no. That's
okay.
Good.
Well, this has been the What Do You Know Show. Always question, what do you know? Signing off. The corona can't beat us.